Saint John Bosco told his Salesians, "In some parts of Italy, there's a custom which I would not like to see introduced among us. It's a sort of kneeling and sitting at the same time, resulting in a squat position. If it's an established custom, it should be discontinued. When it's time to sit, let's sit properly. When it's time to kneel, we should kneel upright, without props. Believe me, external bodily posture does much for interior recollection." That was the way Saint John Bosco lived. Sanctity permeated his whole way of being, and he transmitted his spirituality through solid Catholic reasoning. It's not surprising that he formed many holy people at the Oratory, including Blessed Michael Rua, his successor. If we want to be a disciple of Saint John Bosco, if we want to implement his spirituality in our lives, then we should learn about his disciples, similar to the way we study the apostles of Jesus Christ. There's an incredible description of Father Rua by someone who worked closely with him on a daily basis, Father Joseph Vespignani, a Salesian missionary to Argentina. Today, I'll show how Blessed Michael Rua was a true son of Saint John Bosco through a number of inspiring stories. The Miracles and Prophecies of Saint John Bosco, a project of America Needs Fatima. I'm your host, Matthew Miller. Subscribe for new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The fame of the Salesian congregation spread widely, so much so that many priests wrote to or visited the Oratory anxious to apply. Don Bosco, however, was anything but anxious to encourage them. He used to say, "These men have responsible positions in a diocese. They face countless difficulties in giving them up, and so I doubt that many will come. If they surmount all obstacles to do so, they will, for the most part, begin to complain after a short stay in the house because they cannot continue their old habits and must adjust to a new life. I believe that they're good priests and can do much good where they are, especially in these days when priests are hard to come by. Though I do not close our houses to adults, neither do I go looking for them." One of the priests who came to the Salesians in 1876 was Father Joseph Vespignani of Lugo, who immediately took up the spirit of his new environment from his first day at the Oratory. He had no intention of joining the Salesians, but came to observe Don Bosco's methods and then returned to his own parish to implement them there. But that wasn't how it played out at all. In fact, he remained there a year, became a Salesian, and in 1877 was sent to Argentina. This is how Father Vespignani's secret plan was exposed. He came late in the evening, and Don Bosco had been in the confessional until 10 p.m., since it was the eve of the missionary's departure for Argentina. The saint had just sat down to supper with his priests standing or sitting by him, speaking very familiarly. Asked to sit down at Don Bosco's right, he handed him a letter of recommendation. The saint passed the letter to Father Rua, standing nearby, who read it and said, "This is a newly ordained priest from Romagna, who has come to live with Don Bosco." "Yes, yes," Don Bosco replied, fixing his kind gaze upon him. "You come to stay with us for a while, perhaps a year, to see how we run our schools, and then you will return home to do the same." Father Vespignani was dumbfounded, for as he was leaving his native town of Lugo, his parish priest had literally suggested that he do all that Don Bosco had just told him. Recovering from the initial shock of that strange turn of events, he hastily denied planning anything like that. If Don Bosco would accept him, he would remain with him always. "Well," Don Bosco replied, "now we see each other by the light of this lamp, but tomorrow we shall see each other in daylight and shall get to know each other. So, you're a newly ordained priest? Tomorrow you will celebrate the community mass for our missionaries who are leaving for Argentina." Judging from previous episodes of Prophetic Insight, I think it's highly likely that Saint John Bosco already knew that one day he would send this young priest to Argentina as well. He then bade him good night and entrusted him to Father Rua, who very kindly led him to his room and prepared his bed. After pointing out an inscription on a porcelain plaque hanging by a holy water font and wishing him good night, he withdrew. The inscription read, "No matter how much God may cost, he is never expensive." What impressed Don Vespignani that evening at his first sight of Blessed Michael Rua was his unwavering demeanor toward Don Bosco, standing at his side or seated at his table, as though he awaited a word, an order, or a piece of advice. Don Bosco handed him Father Vespignani's letter of introduction and then put the newcomer entirely into his care. It was clear that Don Bosco acted through Father Rua. Nor did it take him long to realize that both the oratory and the entire congregation depended directly on the young, amiable, and prudent priest. Everything that Father Rua did seemed to be a response to Don Bosco's directives or wishes. Everything was done in his name. He always saw Father Rua punctually at his post, so punctually, in fact, that he would even break off a conversation with Don Bosco to attend night prayers with the confreres and boys. At night, he would see Father Rua walk slowly by himself along the portico, devoutly saying the rosary and gently admonishing those who didn't observe silence or were late to bed. He would then make the rounds of the entire oratory. Then he would repeat his rounds during the middle of the night and end them in church before the Blessed Sacrament. The holy priest kept an eye on everything without ever arousing the feeling that he was being distrustful or was spying on people. So gentle and thoughtful was his manner. On his desk, he always kept little pads of scrap paper and would frequently jot down a word or a name. Then, during the afternoon recreation, he would walk to the playground, slips in hand, to engage a few confreres in brief conversation. He would always use Don Bosco's own expressions. "Would you do me a favor? Would you be willing to go to such and such a place? Would you like to talk about your studies? Does your job give you problems?" And he always ended as Don Bosco did. "Be cheerful, and let's always be friends. Be brave." All admired his thoughtfulness, and a slip from Father Rua became an enviable thing at the oratory. Being called upon kept the confreres on their toes and filled them with feelings of generosity. Father Vespignani learned 2 tactful lessons from Blessed Michael Rua, which showed his faithfulness to their founder. All of Don Bosco's mail correspondence would go through Father Rua's office, and there was once a priest who sought admission to the congregation through a letter. Don Bosco drafted a reply and gave it to Father Vespignani, who happened to come from the same town, asking him to enclose it with a letter of his own. Father Vespignani went straight to Father Rua and informed him that this excellent priest was in an advanced stage of consumption. Fearing that Don Bosco might accept the application, he suggested that Don Bosco's reply be held back, or that the saint be cautioned against accepting a man in such a condition. Very seriously, Father Rua looked at him in astonishment. "Would you dare to intercept a letter from Don Bosco?" he asked. "Would you jeopardize the plan which our Lord and Mary Help of Christians may have for that priest, whom you judge to be unsuitable and given up by his doctors? Don't you know that Don Bosco has a special understanding with Our Lady?" The questions were too much for Father Vespignani. He stammered an apology and mailed the letter. One morning, Father Rua went up to him very quietly, as usual, with some papers in his hand, and said in a tone of mystery, "I have a fine job for you. But first, put yourself in God's grace and say a hearty act of contrition, because Don Bosco's handwriting is most difficult to make out. These are the regulations for the houses which Don Bosco has checked, corrected, and almost entirely rewritten. And here is the final copy for the printer, so transcribe it carefully." When he finished, he asked Father Rua if he could keep 1 page of the original in payment so as to have an autograph of Don Bosco as a relic. Father Rua cut him short. "What are you asking? Don't you know that every scrap of Don Bosco's writing is carefully kept in the congregation's archives? That's especially true of this document, which is the rule of Salesian life." Father Vespignani realized the impropriety of his request, and also the deep veneration of his superior for Don Bosco. More and more I admired Father Rua's promptness, unflagging constancy, religious perfection, and self-sacrifice, joined to a most enchanting gentleness, said Father Vespignani. What charity, what tactful scrutiny, what insight in recognizing and assessing their aptitudes so as to bring them forth in service to Don Bosco's apostolate. This was the alter ego whom Don Bosco found and formed, and whom divine providence chose to be his first successor. Father Michael Rua was beatified on the 29th of October, 1972. If you'd like to hear the story of how Don Bosco predicted the death of Father Rua's brother, just click on this video. God bless you, and Our Lady keep you.